everyone, and welcome to another episode of UBS Road to the Election and Election Watch series. I am so thrilled to welcome today's guest, and let me give you his bio. He is a retired four-star U.S. naval officer, a partner and vice chair of global affairs at the Carlyle Group, chair of the board of trustees at the Rockefeller Foundation, and the former Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, it's an absolute honor to have you join us here for the show. So glad to see you. I want to get into it right away with you because certainly we have a lot of questions to get to related to this election. The first and foremost, I think, which is where you really have a lot of expertise, is what's going on in the Middle East. Obviously, from a human conflict, there's a lot to unpack there. But also, when we look at it from an investment perspective, certainly it affects commodity markets like oil and gas investments. Just wanted to get your thoughts on what's going on there from both sides.
Yeah, I think there are three things that are occurring in the Middle East that we ought to be watching. And you've mentioned a couple of them. One is the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding. 2 million Gazans under attack, 1,000 Israelis killed, 100 hostages. It's an enormous humanitarian disaster. Number two, commodity prices will be affected if this war goes into a wider frame. Right now, it's still largely contained to Gaza. If, for example, Hezbollah to the north attacks Israel, if the Houthi pirates on the Red Sea continue to strike at shipping, those are the kind of ways in which this could widen. I think it's about a 25% chance the war could widen, involve Iran, pull the U.S. back into the Middle East. That's kind of the dark end of the spectrum. Let's hope, and I'll conclude with this, that we get a best case outcome here, which is that Israel concludes its military operations probably in a couple of months. The humanitarian effort improves, perhaps with Egypt offering some kind of opening for UN camps in Egypt, and that a peacekeeping force composed of probably Arab states, part of the Palestinian Authority, some Israeli liaison, can take over security in Gaza, and we avoid that wider war. I think that's probably how it turns out, but there's a lot of variables and a lot of danger ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, Admiral. And obviously we're keeping an eye on all of this as you are. And then we look at it as we talked about there a second ago on the investment side. And certainly, energy is, a very tenuous kind of commodity, looking at oil and gas. And that's a region of the world where we get a lot of our supplies from. So there could potentially be some risk to supplies, I would imagine, at this point.
I think that's a fair assessment. As I look at the Middle East and I think investment, I'm really watching the global energy picture, which is being rewired. And it's been effectively undergoing that process because of Russia pulling out and being pushed out, I should say, of many of the global energy markets of the West. That's leading to opportunities for LNG, for example, to flow into Europe. Piping is now occurring that's going to take Russian oil south to India, east to China. It's a major muscle movement in global energy that we're watching right now. And I think that the Middle East is a part of that larger global system.
Great. So I want to shift with you for a minute, Admiral, and move over to NATO. Obviously, with your history as the Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, you have intimate knowledge of what's going on there. But more specifically, when we look at this potential run, which could be, right now we don't have the specifics, but we think that the candidates will be a rematch of Biden and Trump in November. If there is a Trump win, what potentially could we see when it comes to the U.S.'s involvement with NATO?
The Europeans have committed to spending 2% of their GDP. The U.S. spends about 3.5% of our GDP on defense. Frankly, all the presidents over the last 30 years have been pounding away at NATO to increase defense spending. But I think the broad consensus in Washington across both political parties remains that NATO overall is a good defense opportunity for the United States.
Right, yeah, and as you pointed out, this is all speculative as we sit here today. Technically, these are not even our nominees. The conventions aren't for a couple more months, but obviously speculating what we're seeing down the road. Kind of broadening it out a little bit more with you as well, Admiral. There's China-U.S. tensions continue, especially with tariffs that were put in place when President Trump was in office, and Joe Biden did continue some of those tariffs. Do you see any potential issues down the road with this? Or is there anything that maybe that you would point out to say, you know what, we should keep our eye on this, whether it's regardless of who's in the office or depending on who might actually win in November?
You know, as I step back and really look at global geopolitics, two things really worry me. One is going, I think, surprisingly well. And I'll conclude with one people ought to be watching, but they're not spending a lot of time thinking about it. The two that are not going well are pretty obvious. That's Ukraine, Russia. That's going to continue to be an armed conflict at least through this year, if not beyond. And the other one, which we touched on at the top of the show, is the Middle East. Again, I don't see either of those widening, but certainly there's a lot of drama and difficulty ahead in both. The thing that's going surprisingly well to me is U.S.-China relations. And what I mean by that is late last year, we had a very good summit between President Xi and President Biden. We have had an election in Taiwan since then. It brought in a candidate that was not China's favorite candidate, a man named William Lai. But China has not overreacted to that. And given China's economic challenges, I think they're not looking for a lot of confrontation with the United States right now. So I think overall, and certainly at the Carlyle Group, we are going to continue to look at sensible ways to invest in China. The thing people aren't watching that is kind of worrisome is Venezuela, which is threatening its neighbor Guyana about an oil dispute. That is something that could really roil international oil markets. So that's one to learn a little bit more. We don't have time to unpackage it here, but I'd say Ukraine, Middle East, dangerous. U.S., China, probably going to be fairly stable as the year unfolds. Keep an eye on Venezuela.
Thank you for that, Admiral. Yeah, and obviously these are going to be topics that will come up during debates and on the campaign trails, as they already have. So we'll have to keep our eyes and ears peeled for what the candidates are talking about. Something else that I think, certainly it's something that concerns me, are these deep fakes, these AI, kind of bots. For example, right before the New Hampshire primary, a supposed phone call from President Biden came through, and it was quickly discovered that it was a quote-unquote deep fake where it sounded like him. Now, without getting into the specifics of what that is and how they're made, how concerned are you with not only deep fakes, but cybersecurity when it comes to elections? Not even this one. There's many elections that are happening around the world all the time. How much of a concern is that for you to have a free and fair election?
I've been talking about and concerned about cyber and cybersecurity for decades. I began coding in the 1980s. This is an area of deep focus for me. And yes, I am very concerned about two streams that are crossing. And, it's kind of like in Ghostbusters. You don't want the streams to cross, right? The one stream is great power competition, and the other is AI, which is like pouring gasoline on the fire of cybersecurity. Those two things are coming closer and closer together, Anthony, and we should be very concerned about it. And I'll conclude with this, three things to worry about. One, you mentioned elections, interference, manipulation. Number two is the military sphere. We're watching this unfold, for example, in Ukraine, how these two things come together. And then thirdly, in our commercial sector, our banks. As you well know at UBS, our banking sector is the best protected part of the entire U.S. and global economies. However, they are under risk, principally from Russia and China in this era of great power competition. AI can act as a real implement to that witch's brew.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And obviously, we know that that is a risk in our everyday lives, whether it's your personal banking or what you're doing in your office. Certainly, we have to be vigilant as users of everything digital. So something we all need to pay attention to. But obviously, this is another, I think, topic that will be very prevalent as we get into the closer and closer to November. So, Admiral, as we're wrapping up here, putting your kind of Carlyle hat on here from the investment side, when you look at all of the expectations, whether it's going on for the next couple of weeks, into months, to the year, up into the election and afterwards, what are maybe some investment ideas, especially when it comes to the appetite for risk by a lot of investors? What are you recommending?
Yeah, as I look at this broad swath of geopolitical concerns at Carlyle, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to connect all that together. And 3 or 4 things that sort of fall out of the conversation we just had. We're not running away from China. We think U.S.-China is going to stay relatively stable, and there'll be real opportunities there. China is having a rough patch right now, but longer term, it's a smart country with a lot of capability. Number 2, kind of in that same vein, India. Narendra Modi, the leader, is probably going to get reelected. That's stability. And they are very much emerging as a leader in the global south. So investments in India look quite good. Number 3, kind of a point to be made about all the difficulties in Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East. Frankly, defense stocks are going to look pretty good on all sides of the Atlantic. And then 4th and finally, I think that without any question, and we touched on it already, energy, the rewiring of the global energy system is going to proceed. We at Carlyle, we're going to continue to invest both in the rewiring part of this, but also in the green side of this. You've got to make those investments if you're going to be able to divest from the hydrocarbon side of things. There's a handful of ideas we're exploring at the Carlyle Group.
Excellent. Admiral, thank you very much. We so appreciate you coming by. First of all, thank you for your service and all of the roles that you've had in your career and continue to do for us, for our clients, for our citizens. We really appreciate you, and thanks for taking time. I know you're constantly being interviewed. I recognize the background of where you're doing this right now for us because I've seen it on every media channel, so we really appreciate you making a few minutes to talk with us today. Good to see you.
My pleasure, Anthony. Always great to be with UBS.
Thanks, Admiral. We'll talk to you soon. And thank you all so much for joining us for this episode. And we hope you got a lot out of it, because I certainly did by talking to the Admiral. So thanks again for joining us, everybody. And for more on the 2024 election, there's a lot of content available for you at ubs.com/election watch. We've got UBS Road to the Election video series. All the episodes on that show, this one, will be up there, plus lots of other great content from the Chief Investment Office. We also encourage you to continue this conversation with your financial advisor. From New York City, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you soon.